Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Harrison, and in today's episode of the Chris Tech Chat, we have an amazing guest, Mr. Tony Casciotta. Tony is a former Vice President of Information Technology and CIO at Broward College, which is one of the largest public colleges in America. He brings 40-plus years of experience while providing transformative leadership for all aspects of the technology environment, including PM, cloud-based applications, systems, networking, databases, web management, classroom technology, managed services, vendor partnerships, cybersecurity, and data analysis. He is a firm believer in aligning IT solutions with the goals of the institution, operational excellence, building strategic technology plans, agility, process improvement, and being the trusted advisor to all internal and external business partners dominate his agenda. He earned his undergraduate degree in computer technology from Control Data Institute, CDI. Tony has held various management roles at AT&T, Cisco Systems, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, NatWest Bank, and most recently was the CIO and CTO at Altran. Tony is also the president of the CIO Council of South Florida, the executive board member of the Tech Hub South Florida, and the board member of the Dell Higher Education Advisory Council. Tony has also presented numerous topics at several national conferences, including Gartner Symposium and CIO Summit, State of the CIO, and World Education Congress. Recently, Tony has been nominated also for an Orby Award as finalist for CIO of the Year by Inspired, and he resides in South Florida. Today, Tony is a principal and management consultant, providing fractional CIO and CTO services to companies looking for seasoned and experienced professional. Tony, that is one heck of a professional track record, and we're so glad to have you on our podcast. Today,
Thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tony. Today, with Tony and his expertise and Julio's support, we'll be discussing topics such as migration to the cloud, which is important. It's one of the top priorities. Cybersecurity, operational efficiencies, student experience from the lens of a CIO from higher ed, artificial intelligence, which is in everybody's radar, and last but not least, talent acquisition as business process outsourcing BPO to nearshore companies such as Talentus Global. Tony, welcome to the Chris Tech Chat podcast. And once again, we're so glad to have you on board.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Chris. I really do appreciate it. And I'm glad to take the time to have this conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's start with migration to the cloud. From your lens as a former CIO for one of the largest public institutions in the U.S., how important is migration to the cloud? Give us your thoughts on sort of the pros and cons, state of the union for this year. How do you foresee it, especially as we're getting into 2025, first quarter, we got the elections out of the way. 2024, I think, was sort of a soft year for everybody across technology. A lot of changes happening, AI pushing the envelope. But from your perspective, migration to the cloud, walk us through your thoughts on that.
I think you have to look at that from two different angles, right? There's the SaaS solutions, right? So the ERP providers in the cloud, as an example, the student information system providers in the cloud. And then you have to look at maybe your infrastructure and do I migrate that to an AWS or a Microsoft Azure, et cetera. I think in either case, all organizations, not just higher ed, really have to take a hard look at that, because we're going to talk about employee retention and acquisition and retainment, right? To build a big programming staff to write code for a large institution or a large enterprise just really isn't worth the effort any longer. There are so many cloud-based SaaS solutions that you can just subscribe to, and you don't really necessarily have to worry about the code that runs and the hardware that it all runs on, because that's provided to you. So you can just take Oracle as an example, or Workday as an example, or there's a variety of others that you just become a subscription and you upload your data to that. And you now you want people that understand the business aspect of how the institution runs. And those will be the people that support those applications. No longer need programmers to do that. So, I mean, that's one very unique advantage, I believe.
So, Tony, I think times have changed. And I think on a separate podcast, we were talking about how different it was in the early 2000s when institutions were building everything from the ground up. There was no CRM, no LMS, no student information system in place for higher ed. an organization had a huge IT team building custom solutions, maintaining those, dealing with security and cybersecurity and all those things. And in today's world, that's almost commoditized, right? You can do a better job of migrating into out-of-the-box solutions that are on the cloud already, best of breed, and focus more on the total enterprise architecture integration and vendor selection than continue to try to build and maintain it locally, right? That's sort of your lens, your perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, the most simple example to me is email. I mean, migrating to Office 365, you no longer have to worry about versions of Exchange. You no longer have to worry about what hardware it's running on. Not only is your email available to you anywhere, anytime, on any device, but it's also all the applications that are behind it. Now you have online storage in the cloud that you don't have to maintain on premise. So now all of a sudden you start thinking about all that hardware and all that horsepower and disk space that used to have in a local data center just disappears. And you no longer have to even need a systems administrator to manage that. You maybe need one person that interfaces with Microsoft to ensure that, the rules, there's a lot of security rules that go in the background, right? But you want to make sure that you have somebody that's going to make sure that those security policies are in place. But you no longer have to worry about hardware, version controls, patching, anything along those lines. And all these applications now become available 24/7 on any device from anywhere. So that's just a really good example of my opinion.
What do you think are the factors preventing institutions and organizations from moving into the cloud? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think if we go back, let's go back a couple of years before really SaaS applications, like I just mentioned, O365 became available. The real push was get everything out of my data center and let's put it in AWS, or let's get everything out of my data center and let's put it up in Microsoft's clouds or IBM's clouds. What happened when we did that? Well, we found out that it really wasn't that cost effective, because if you have on-prem systems, you're running your dev environment, your test environment, you're running that 24/7. Well, guess what? If you do that in AWS, you're paying for that 24/7. So you have to have a different mindset and think about, do I really need test and app dev available 24/7, or does it just really need to be available maybe 10 or 12 hours a day? So when the realization of that started to happen, everybody started to pull back and say, wait a second, going to the cloud is not less expensive. It actually turns out to be more expensive if I just want to mirror my environment and mirror up to the cloud. So I think people have taken a different approach, and the technology has evolved so rapidly with SaaS-based applications. And so I think people that are using AWS are really just using it for specialty workloads. They're not really using it for general computing.
So putting a plan together, putting a strategy behind what really deserves or should be on the cloud from a SaaS perspective versus on-prem, you think that's one of the key ingredients to the success?
Absolutely. So just as an example, what I did at the college was we put together a strategic plan. We put together a 5-year strategic plan, and that plan basically said we are migrating every application, every server, every CPU, every disk space to the cloud. And of course, that doesn't happen overnight, but it took us 5 years. And matter of fact, Broward's on their last leg of that journey because they had some challenges with going to the student information system. And so now they're actually migrating the student information system to the cloud, to a SaaS provider, and they'll be done. They won't have anything locally in any data centers any longer.
Great point. I think that's a valid point. It's something that institutions and companies need to take into account.
And I think, well, let me just put one more caveat on that. I think the most important thing is that you have to have the leadership of any institution or any enterprise behind the CIO 100% to do this, because it is a culture change. It is a change of the way people do business, because now you're actually focused on business processes as opposed to functionality, right? Because the functionality is in the cloud, and then you have to understand how the business process takes advantage of the functionality, which is a major change. So when organizations do this, they really need to make sure that leadership's behind them 100%, and they have a very strong change management story and team to actually implement it.
Great. With a cultural alignment into that strategy in place. Absolutely. Yep. Makes perfect sense. Tony, switching gears a little bit into something that is on top of every major CIO, CTO leader of an organization, which is cybersecurity. Having watched the latest annual Davos report, conferences, interviews a few weeks ago, one of the things that really kept them awake was cybersecurity, how to deal with cybersecurity. And I will touch a little bit on that as we jump into AI, but how basically one of the messages that they were conveying is how AI is basically rewriting the cybersecurity playbook, right? Your thoughts on cybersecurity, how important it is. A lot of institutions today understand the importance and they have a dedicated CISO part of the organization. And if they don't, they hire someone who's got a well-rounded set of skill sets, not only from a CIO, CTO perspective, but also understand the security side of it. Your thoughts on cybersecurity today and where it's heading into the future, and maybe touch a little bit on AI and the impact into it.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Chris. I think it's really important that the CIO makes the leadership team, and if there's a board of trustees or directors, very much aware of the risks of not putting in proper cybersecurity policies. And I don't mean just writing them, I mean implementing them. And that ranges from who can access what data internally and externally to things like, I need access to financial aid data, but why do you need access to financial aid data? So those questions need to be answered. So you need to identify the risk and what would happen if the organization unfortunately runs into a breach situation.
Yep.
There's brand identity that gets ruined. There's financial implications. There's loss of customers. There's a lot of things. So to me, it's very important, regardless of the size of your organization, you need a group of people, whether it's external, whether it's a fractional CISO, but you need a group of people that are absolutely focused on cybersecurity. And in my humble opinion, as soon as you get to scale, the CIO can no longer do that. The CIO needs to hire a chief information security officer and put talent around that person so that they actually are watching the store 24/7. And that's where I think AI starts to creep in. There's an awful lot of products out there that will actually help monitor your environment and alert you to anomalies. And to me, that's really key, right? Because if somebody comes in and brute force, you have firewalls and you have other pieces of hardware that are going to raise a flag. But it's the behavior when somebody gets into your environment that you really want to pay attention to. Like all of a sudden, and we'll take an internal situation. All of a sudden, I have a programmer that's always going over and looking at payroll data. Why are you doing that? And you'd never know that if you didn't have some layer of sophistication on top of that, in my opinion, AI driven. So it looks at behaviors and says, wait a second, we know you have full access because you're a programmer and you got to touch all these systems. But why every day are you looking at payroll data? Something doesn't seem right. And so that's where I think AI is going to play a big role going forward. And it already is. I mean, there's a lot of organizations that are adopting, and some of them are really kind of turning a blind eye to it because they don't trust it. I think we're at a point in time, it's 2025, we have to start trusting AI and we have to start trusting our vendors to help us secure our environments.
So as institutions and organizations start to scale out, they need to bring a seasoned CISO that is focused on cybersecurity, because in the eyes of the CIO, the CTO, there's just too much out there and you need to pay attention to potential attacks, external or internal. And by bringing someone who understands that deep into it, can probably help mitigate some of those issues, but policies in place, better processes, better controls in there, and mitigate all those things.
Absolutely, no doubt about it.
Yep. Julio, I think you wanted to.
Yeah, I was going to say, to Tony's point, behavior. You can configure these systems with patterns. When the pattern threshold is broken. But Tony hit the nail on the head there. Absolutely.
Yep, that very important.
Yeah, and Chris, you brought up a really good point. I mean, there's smaller organizations, even smaller colleges, may not be able to afford a chief information security officer, and that's understandable. That particular position nowadays commands a fair amount of compensation, regardless of the size of the organization. But there's many organizations out there that will actually help you do that,
Right.
whether that's through a part-time or fractional CISO,
Right.
or just the fact that they already have the tools, and you become a subscriber of those tools in a SaaS environment, and they're doing everything behind the scenes and just letting you know when problems arise.
Great point. Yep. Either way, it's an area that needs dedicated attention, whether it's internal with a full-time CISO like you mentioned, or it's being outsourced to a company that helps you manage those processes and leveraging the tools and reporting and alerting you if there are any anomalies. Switching gears into a topic of operational efficiencies, how important that is in today's organizations, institutions, how important has been in the past and how important it's going to be in the future. What are your thoughts on that? What's your vision on that, Tony?
Well, I think let's take public colleges and universities first. Well, actually, let's start with colleges. Colleges throughout the country, public colleges, are funded through taxpayer dollars. And so it's really, really important that you pay attention to where the money is being spent. And, a few years back, budgets weren't really on the minds of a lot of people in terms of what the IT spend was. But nowadays, the student experience, for especially public colleges, is probably the most important thing. Because attracting a student is one thing, but getting a student registered and into a seat in a classroom is quite another. And they're two different things. And so the student experience has to be very, very smooth in order to increase retention and increase enrollment. And so if IT is not really efficient and they're not assisting the organization to do that, in my opinion, that's a lot of wasted money and resources going out the door, because the most important thing in a college is the student success. And the way the student's going to be successful is have a good experience. That also means you have to look at, do you have really good faculty members? Do you have to start doing some analytics on the back end and say, why are these professors' classes not filling up? And why are these other professors, they can't get another kid into their class because they're full. So there's a lot of different, I'll call operational efficiencies that need to be looked at. And it's staff, it's technology, and it's really the student experience. And I think that can be enhanced greatly through the use of AI, where you're not using IT resources to help a student get registered. I was just having a really good conversation with another CIO of actually a private university just the other day. They're actually using AI. Once a student starts an application, an AI agent pops up and actually walks them through the entire application. And the students actually start to realize they're talking to an
Train agent.
a bot, and they're okay with it. Because think about it. I mean, 20 years ago, you wouldn't be okay with talking to a robot, right? But nowadays, everybody's used to it, especially the younger generation, these 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds that are coming into college. They have no problem with a screen popping up and helping them fill out an application. So that student experience to me is the most important thing. And so you have to take away from that manual, and I'll call manual labor, that IT has done in the past. And I mentioned it before, system administrators, patching, upgrades. Do I have enough CPU power to run my applications? All that goes away with putting that stuff in the cloud. And then it also actually helps with AI, because now AI is accessing the same systems that are being monitored and maintained by somebody else.
Agree. And I think the new generations, Z, Alpha, and Beta, all those are all over this. They're okay. They're so hyper connected to their devices, whether it's their cell phone or the tablet on it, that they're okay with that, but they just need to get immediate response, immediate attention. So I think your point is everything around operational efficiencies has to be centered around the student experience. The student experience being the most important constituent at any institution, college, or university. It's got to be centered around that. And in today's world, you got tons of tools in the AI that can help you. And I think the segment is more ready than maybe 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago when AI started. Some of us that started pioneering that years ago, it was a little bit harder for the constituents to understand maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago how important an AI chatbot can help them. But I think the newer generations, like you said, Tony, they're accustomed to that. They're okay with that, talking to a trained AI chatbot that can help them through the enrollment process or the matriculation process and just get them done with it so they can enroll in the class and start their education, right?
Absolutely. Another thought too is, it's not just about IT efficiency, it's about business process efficiency, right? Yeah. So if you think about it, with AI, you could automate your mailroom, you could automate your accounts receivable and accounts payable. How about transcripts? Yeah. I've walked into registrars' offices in colleges across the country where literally there's piles and piles and piles of paper transcripts. Stacks.
Yes.
Of students that are sending in their transcripts so that they can get credit and enter the college. And they're just sitting on somebody's desk. No one's processing it. They all could be processed with AI. They could be read in and they can actually create a student record for that student. Where you say, hey, we're going to give you these 10 credits or these 12 credits for these courses that you've already taken. And so you're already a step ahead of the game, and it's already built into their application.
And maybe 70 or 80% of their transcripts in there can be automated through an AI agent in there. And then the exception, the 20% or 30%, hey, we'll assign an advisor for you to be able to talk and go through those, or someone that can evaluate those transcripts manually. But the bulk of it, I agree 100%, can be already automated in there. And then hence provide a better student experience, right? Otherwise, the student is just waiting at home and saying, how many credits are they going to accept for me to transfer? Should I look at another university? Maybe this college or university is not for me. Maybe let me look at somebody else, right? So that period of time, accelerating that process, streamlining that process with AI, I think is it's front and center.
Yeah, I mean, we did a study, and what you said is absolutely 100% true. We did a study at my own college that I was there, and we found out that more than 50% of the people that sent in transcripts went to a different college because we never processed their transcript to even get back to them. So they just said, well, they don't care about me. I'm going to go to a different college.
We were talking about this the other day, Tony. In today's world and your experience, what is the turnaround time to enroll and put a student, their butt in a seat? I mean, is it a day or two or a week? I mean, nowadays it should be like almost instantaneous, correct?
I agree 100% with you. I don't want to name, there's a couple of online schools out there. I won't name any names.
Right.
But literally, you go to the website, you give them your name, your phone number, and some basic information. And guess what? Within 30 minutes, you're a student. You have a student ID. You have a student email address, and an advisor is calling you.
That's right.
30 minutes.
Yes. I venture to say, seeing some other institutions and being an online student myself, with FAFSA and everything included, right? Some kind of aid, within one day, you're fully done. Right? So anyway,
I did some tests. I actually registered for a couple of online schools, and each one of them acted the exact same way. I was a student, had a student ID, had a student email address, and I had an advisor on the phone within 15 to 30 minutes.
Yep.
And I think, Tony, you're onto something. Those institutions are the ones that are going to continue to capitalize and attract students in place. The ones that are operating under the older model, send your application, paper and pencil, we'll review it, we'll get back to you a week after. Those days are gone. And institutions are complaining. They're losing, enrollments are going down. They're not attracting new students. Guess what? Look at your backyard. Look at the process. Look how non-student centered you are. And those institutions will disappear. We'll get to consolidate. But the ones that are efficient, the ones that, especially with the new generation, that they expect things to be instantly, they're hyper-connected, and they want answers immediately. And they're okay talking to a trained AI chatbot, but they want the answers immediately. They want to be able to know that they are accepted already. They have, FAFSA already involved in there. They have some sort of financial aid, like Julio mentioned, already packaged, and they're ready to go. But if you give them 2, 3, 4 days a week, they're going to be looking somewhere else. And guess what? That institution just lost another student for maybe a 4-year degree, or maybe dual enrollment, even worse.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. No, I'm 100% on board with you. Any other thoughts on AI and where do you see? I mean, obviously we saw DeepSeek coming out from China. Allegedly, they spent less than $6 million training the last model a fraction of the cost of what the US has spent on some of the OpenAI models and ChatGPT and all that. Your thoughts on AI in the academia world? There's a lot of concern still about plagiarism and things like that, and the usage within the academia, within a class, within a course as a tool for helping the student versus making sure they're not using for plagiarism reasons on it. Your thoughts on that?
I really love that you brought up this subject. So I'm going to say something that might be a little bit shocking. I don't think this is an IT issue. This is not an IT issue at all. This is an issue for the provost. And I've had those deep conversations with presidents and provosts before. Let's just go back a few years. What happened when the first kid walked into his math class with a calculator?
Yeah. Shocked everybody.
Isn't this really the same thing, right? That somebody can go to ChatGPT and start to write a paper just like they went to a calculator and help figure out a math equation. So I think colleges and universities and higher ed in general has to be accepting of the technology because it's not going away. You just mentioned China just rolled out, the nemesis of ChatGPT, so to speak.
Yep.
So they really have to, and I've spoken to some professors about this, and they are okay with students using ChatGPT for some of the basics, right? Just like we all did in the past. We went either to Google, we went to the library, we looked up facts and figures, we put it in our papers, and we submitted it. Well, you can do that online with ChatGPT. The problem is you just can't use the whole thing. You actually have to put some effort into that and then use those facts and figures that maybe came out of ChatGPT because it's just not going away. So it's really more on the professor's shoulders to start to figure out what is really plagiarism versus what is an aid like a calculator to math that somebody used in the English or in their social studies or history classes when they use ChatGPT to write a paper. So I think, again, not so much an IT issue. I don't think the technology is here to stay. There's nothing the CIO could do. You can't just eliminate it. I mean, because the second a student walks off the campus and goes onto their own internet connection, they can start using it. You could try and block it on campus. It's not gonna help you. Again, I think it's more the, and I hate to throw things over the wall, but I really do think that this is an academic issue that they need to face, not necessarily a technology issue.
Technology. And don't ignore it, accept it, embrace it, and figure it out. Where do you draw the line? But it's something that is already here, right? Donnie, you would agree something that's already here. It's got to be embraced by the academia. The provost is not really an IT, a CIO, CTO issue, and it is more the academia side and saying, how much are we going to allow students to be able to leverage that? Or even faculty can use some tools for their pedagogical purposes of it, right? Teaching better and maybe more efficient in class and conducting a better lecture. Especially some of the faculty members that have been moved from a brick and mortar, from a chalk and walking to now delivering an online class, which we all know is a whole different experience. Julio, go ahead.
Yeah, or like Tony said, you guys are saying, right, is, faculty side, embrace the AI, Turnitin has plagiarism checking, right? And some and Canvas. And so there's tools to check ChatGPT 0. Embrace the other side of it where the professors can also check the work of the students, turning it in and ensuring that there's less plagiarism. So,
absolutely,
to your point, guys, leverage the technology and tools to your benefit, right?
Chris, you hit the nail on the head. I could see faculty actually having part of their curriculum to teach the proper use of these AI tools.
Yes,
and that's coming. If there's a college right down the road here that I think is already doing it. It's part of you can go in and get a degree in AI, and part of that learning process is you learn the do's and don'ts of how to take advantage of this technology.
In fact, that brings up a point. My son is a graduate of Christopher Columbus, and the teachers there were actually telling the students, use AI. Please, go ahead, use it.
And these are high school students.
And these were high school students.
So imagine when they go into college, their expectations are going to be the same. Where are my tools in place in there, right? How do I develop myself into it? How do I grow? How do I write? How to do all those things using those tools in place? And I think going back to Tony, once we start seeing the AI tools built into the syllabus, which means that faculty member has embraced AI, that's when I think we're going to see a much better experience on behalf of the students, making it part of it. Great. These are all great, wonderful topics. Switching into our last subject, around talent acquisition, business process outsourcing, BPO to nearshore companies such as Talentus Global. Also in the news early on this week, Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, indicated he's going to be eliminating a significant amount of positions out of San Francisco and outsourcing to Mexico for some of their engineers on Salesforce. Your thoughts on outsourcing and nearshore and things like that, Tony, especially from a labor arbitrage perspective on it, from a supply and demand? We know there's going to be a lot of talent exiting the United States because of current policies and by the administration and the government and all that. What do you see the future 2025 and beyond from a BPO perspective and from your lens of your 40 plus years of experience and outsourcing and labor arbitrage?
Yeah, well, there is a tremendous amount of pressure on budgets across the board, not just IT. And if we step back and we think about what happened in 2020 when we entered into the pandemic and COVID era, all of a sudden technology became the forefront because everybody had to work remotely. And that created all kinds of issues, right? From technology issues, is it secure? Do they have secure communication, secure internet connections, et cetera, to productivity? How do you measure productivity when you had somebody in an office sitting next to you and now all of a sudden they're working at home 40 plus hours a week, whatever the case may be? So that's a challenge right there. But I think we've overcome that challenge. I think we've learned through the pandemic to figure out how do we measure productivity from a remote worker perspective. And that's a really good thing. The negative side is that people became worth a lot more than they were prior to COVID. So, project managers, I'm just going to pick on them for a second. Most project managers were making, $75,000 to $90,000 a year in most places. Maybe a little bit more if it was larger projects, a little bit more sophisticated projects. Now project managers locally are commanding $150,000 to $200,000 a year. That's an awful lot of money for a project manager that may be just on one or two projects. And I'm not trying to diminish the value of a project manager because in my opinion, they're worth their weight in gold. I just don't know if it's that much gold. And so I think organizations are really now, they have no choice but to embrace remote workers. Yes, the government regulates some of that. So in the state of Florida, as an example, if you work for a public entity, whether that's the sheriff's office or a college or a hospital, you have to live and reside in Florida to take advantage of the retirement system. If you're an out-of-state worker, you can't go into the retirement system. Or you're actually not supposed to be working in some cases within the state of Florida. So I think more and more organizations are looking towards specific talent that they can bring in at a reasonable rate. And I don't think, for the most part, people care where they reside. I think what they care about is, can they communicate?
Yes.
So, for an example, I don't think you can have workers in a foreign country that have such a heavy accent that people can't understand them. And I'm not disparaging anybody of any race, any religion, any country from which they come. But you have to be sensitive to communications because that's, at the end of the day, that's how humans interact, right? They communicate. And if I don't understand what you're saying, I am probably going to stop trusting you over time, right? Even though your workers might still be good, if I try to communicate a goal and you don't understand it or vice versa, that becomes a real challenge. So I think it's going to be more and more acceptable to use talent that's offshore or nearshore or just in another state. Because if you think about people that, and I'll just pick a state, people that live in Wyoming as an example, and they have IT skills and they can work remotely. Well, the cost of a house is much different in Wyoming than the cost of a house in South Florida. Right. So they're not commanding the same sort of salaries, but they're just as good as workers, if not better. So I think that blend is still there. Me as a CIO, I loved walking the floor and interacting with people and talking with people. So when I transitioned to a remote workforce, I made sure that I had leadership meetings, I had direct manager meetings, I had staff meetings and they were all virtual, but we all communicated. We were all on the same page. Everybody heard the same thing over and over again, even though they weren't in the office interacting directly with me or interacting directly with their boss.
So having a continuous communication and being engaged with that remote workforce, I think it's key. And you mentioned, I think, one of the driving factors for a lot of companies, institutions, organizations, if there is a financial pressure to reduce the budgets and all that, outsourcing nearshore could be a great opportunity in place if you pick the right partner and the resources are culturally aligned, can communicate well, which means they can understand each other's expectations, deliverables, goals. They have the experience and can work well together as a global team and still feel connected, right? Because I think the biggest fear is you're going to have this remote team. They're going to feel disconnected. They're going to miss deadlines. There's going to be miscommunications. You're going to overspend on it, which you shouldn't. If you run it well, then you have a right team and you have an efficient organization in place. And also, I don't know what are your thoughts, but I think after the pandemic, the model where people were working remotely, and now you see some of the tech companies saying, no, you got to go back to the office 100%. I don't know, and I'm interested in understanding your thoughts as well. I don't know that workforce will want to go back 100% and work at the office. I think the hybrid model is here to stay long-term. I don't know that the labor force will ever go back to that 1990s where people will dress up in a suit and tie and drive to the work Monday through Friday. I don't know that model will continue to be sustainable.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with you 100%. I think, and I'm not going to call out the federal government, which we all turn on the news today here in the United States. We hear about government workers being called back to the office. The point I was trying to make is, and I said it before, the organizations that can measure and understand the productivity of their remote workforce are the most comfortable with it. And they get the most out of it. It's the organizations that refuse to understand how to manage remote workers, how to measure productivity from remote workers. Those are the ones that are saying, come back to the office because we don't know what you're doing. Well, that's a real problem, especially what you just said, Chris. I mean, it's hybrid. I've had people call me up and say, Tony, I just want to let you know, I love working here. I think you're a great leader. I think this is a great culture of this organization. But if you make me come back to the office, the next thing that's going to happen is you're getting my resignation. Because I've now built my family life around working remotely. I'm still giving you all the productivity you want. It just isn't all those same hours, right? So I had this one person basically tell me, I have children, I take them to school. So an hour in my morning goes away because I drive them to school and an hour in the afternoon when I go pick them up. But in the meantime, I'm working and I'm working after hours and I'm working before hours to make up that time difference. But if you disrupt my family life, I need to find another job.
Plus that person is probably wasting 2 hours a day driving, times 5, that's 10. That's 40 hours a week wasted just trying to get to the physical office that can be used in a much more efficient way and provide probably for that engineer or that person a better work-life balance, right?
Absolutely.
And
awesome. Julio.
It's good for morale at the end of the day, right? You accommodate them, you pay them back in work-life balance, right? And they, in turn, are happier employees, right? And therefore, you see it in productivity. So it's a real morale booster. I agree with you guys. Yeah,
it is. I think you guys are spot on. And Tony, as we're reaching sort of the end of our episode for today, I want to thank you on behalf of the Chris Tech Chat for joining us. I think your insight and your thoughts on all these subjects and topics are super valuable. I think the audience will take advantage of those. So once again, thank you for joining us in here. We look forward for having you in the near future to discuss some of these topics and maybe in depth in place in there. And I want to wish you a great rest of the week. And thanks again for joining the Chris Tech Chat.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I had a great time and I'd love to come back again soon.